Hey there, athletes. Coach John Ferry here from Team Wilpers. Very excited to welcome you to the Week 2 athlete briefing for our Summer Run Challenge. So as usual, we'll start with our Week 1 review here. So we started this week with a 20-minute distance test. So congratulations to everybody who went out, knocked out that 20-minute distance test. You have set the baseline for your challenge. If you didn't do that 20-minute distance test this week, it meant you were doing a progression run, carrying over your paces from just a couple weeks ago. So that progression run, the goal was just to get a little bit faster over the course of the run, refamiliarize ourselves with some of the paces that we've been touching on here recently, and get ready and primed to perform in the following workout. Run number 2, VO2 Max workout. So short, hard intervals. So we're getting familiar with that pace here in this week, hopefully, starting to work on power generation and running economy. So that's kind of, I think I said it last week, a little bit of an intro to VO2 Max, getting started right here in week 1. Run number 3, our endurance run. So our bread and butter, nice and light from start to finish. I always want everyone walking away from their endurance run at the end of the week knowing that they had a little bit more to give. You don't want to walk away feeling too gassed from that workout. That means you took it a little bit too hard. So keep it nice and easy. So a little bit of housekeeping. So if you have not done so already, make sure to visit the portal, input the results of your 20-minute distance test so that you get your paces populated, because you're going to need them over the course of the next 8 weeks. So make sure you go in there. While you're in there, make sure you're checking off the box claiming that you did the workout. We always want to be chasing that 100% completion percentage. That is absolutely the best way to put yourself in position to be successful over the scope of that challenge. So always want to be tracking and chasing that 100% or as close as possible to that number. So get in there and check your box. A couple little notes on the strength additions. The video links should be tidied up, should hopefully be working for everybody. Haven't heard too much feedback there, so I assume that it is going okay. If not, as always, let us know. In case you didn't know, I posted a Zoom call I had with Ryan Hopkins discussing the first 4-week block of this strength training and posted it on the Facebook page. So if you saw it, I hope you found it valuable. If you didn't see it, and particularly if you didn't see it and have questions about the strength program and some of the rationale behind it, might be worth a view. Ryan is a genius when it comes to this stuff, so I always walk away with from my own conversations with him feeling very enlightened, and I hope that you feel the same. So now let's jump onto our week 2 workouts here. So run number 1, threshold run. So the base of this workout is basically 4 by 3 minutes threshold, a little bit different for the more difficult version of the workouts, but that's kind of our base here. So similarly to our VO2 Max workout this week, this is a bit of I would say like an intro to threshold. So 3 minutes is a little bit short for a typical threshold workout. We're going to build it up over the scope of this challenge, but this is a great way to touch it if you haven't touched it for a little while and kind of get into that feel. It's a great way to kind of come in and get into the challenge, into the warm weather, etc. So it's kind of our ease into threshold. We're going to certainly build upon it over the course of the next 7 weeks to follow. So a couple characteristics of a threshold workout. So unlike VO2 Max, this is going to be characterized by lengthy work periods and relatively short recoveries. So you'll notice the difference immediately that we're doing longer sets, shorter recoveries when it comes to threshold. So this week, starting at 3-minute intervals, over the course of the next 7 weeks, where we will kind of leave these things off, is getting all the way up to about 10-minute intervals at this threshold pace. So I'm going to talk about pacing a little bit, but just think about that when you're starting to get into it. If 3 minutes feels a little bit easy, how would 10 minutes feel? Our run number 2, VO2 Max runs, is a combination of 1 and 2 minute intervals on 1 minute rest. So you can immediately tell the difference between the VO2 Max work and the threshold work we're doing. So that threshold work on a work to recovery ratio is 3-to-1. The VO2 Max work, we're doing 1-to-1 and 2-to-1. So the work to recovery of that VO2 Max is going to be a little bit shorter periods of work, a little bit lengthier, more healthy bouts of recovery. That's what we're working on here. Once again, the power, efficiency, running form, that's all the benefits we get from that VO2 Max plus the actual VO2 Max work itself. And then run number 3 will always be our long run of the week, our endurance run. So hopefully the best run of the week. So we want nice and easy, as we talked about before, from start to finish. It's a great run to take outside, to run with friends, etc. Hopefully the best run of the week, always definitely the one that I'm always looking forward to personally. So some questions that came up from the Facebook group. So first question here, actually on the strength front, about what is a superset, which is a great question. You know, there's some of this vernacular that we throw around all the time amongst each other, and sometimes we don't take the time to properly explain it. So this would be a great one. I'm sure it would be applicable to a lot of people. So I want to use an example from the challenge itself. So day 1, the first superset listed is a 90-90 split squat and a dumbbell bridge press. So what makes this a superset as opposed to just sets is that you do the 90-90 split squat, or that you do not do the 90-90 split squat 3 times in a row. What you do is a 90-90 split squat on both legs, and then you do the dumbbell bridge press. That one and then the other is one set. Then you repeat back to the top and start a new second set to follow. Each week the amount of sets is a little bit different, so make sure to kind of pay attention to that as we go through. So the differences of, if you think about what a set would be kind of traditional, if you think of bench press, going in, doing the same exercise 3 times in a row, for example, 3 sets of 10 in one exercise, that would be a traditional set as opposed to a superset. So it'd be one exercise followed by the other. So there was kind of a part B to this, which is there was a question about the rest period during strength and supersets in particular. And so I want you to be very, very attentive because Ryan left some specific guidance as to the rest in between exercises and in between supersets. So for example, once again, using this exact scenario, the rest he indicated in between the 2 exercises was 40 seconds. The rest he indicated between supersets was 80 seconds. So he wants to make sure in between those sets and in between those exercises, you're getting enough rest to be able to go into the next move feeling very rested, fresh, and ready to tackle it. That is how you train power and strength, as opposed to just muscular endurance would be to kind of combine them all together without taking any breaks. That's not really what we're going for. We want the strength. Our next question here was, I have a question specific to adjusting to weather conditions. I understand that easy pace is a large range and I'm able to adapt and modify within those boundaries to accommodate for heat and humidity. But I'm wondering about more structured workouts and if or how to adjust the pace for intervals when the weather presents challenging conditions. Is there a general rule of thumb when it comes to how much pace to take off? So we talked a little bit about this last week in terms of general adaptation, but there's a little bit more of a specific question and it's going to come into play for most of us here pretty immediately. So Matt actually was the one I think who tackled a lot of the general adaptation stuff last week. So if you have questions on general adaptation, go back, listen to Mr. Wilpers. He knows a thing or two. He's not so bad. I often reference the Tinman heat index charts to kind of determine what kind of heat adjustment and pace heat adjustment might be a good starting point. However, there's a very important kind of notation at the top of that chart, which reads pace per mile for continuous runs over 20 minutes. So what that is kind of referring to is that the longer the period of work, the more impacted you'll be by heat. So a long run that's a couple hours long, you're going to have a pretty big impact by heat. A 20 minute easy run, very little. Maybe even going out to race a 5K, not so much. If you're around the 20-minute 5K, which is pretty fast for most runners, but 20-minute 5K, you're probably not going to be that much affected. That's why you see so many more 5Ks, 5 milers, etc. at this time of year than half marathons, etc. So when it comes once again to this challenge and some of the workouts here, when we were talking about, we're doing 1 minute, 2 minute, and basically 3 minute sets over the scope of this week. So we're not hitting really a 20-minute mark. Sure, the totality of the workout is hitting 20 minutes, or 20 minutes plus. They're usually going to be 30 minutes or longer. But these sets where you're really pushing the pace are relatively short. So if I were sending an athlete to the track with warm or humid conditions right now to run 1 or 2 minute intervals of VO2 max, or 3 minutes or 4 minutes of threshold. I would certainly allow them to take that easy pace, cool down, recoveries, and they can do it as slow as they wanted to, whatever it took to get that heart rate back down and settled. But during the interval itself, I'd have them go ahead and shoot for that high pace, because they're just not going to be that badly heat affected over those short intervals, and in particular, relatively short workouts, all things considered. Then on the longer workouts, the 45 to 60 minute, long runs, I would make sure they were dialing it back to make sure they were staying in those zones. What in essence you can do if you have longer sets, so let me rephrase a little bit. For our marathoners, for half marathoners out there, you're going to start looking at workouts very soon that are warm up, cool down with 4, 5, 6 miles at marathon pace or half marathon pace. That's a very different dynamic all of a sudden, right? You're talking about an interval that's 30, 40 plus minutes long. You absolutely are going to get a negative performance impact. So that would be a perfect opportunity for an interval of that duration to use something like the 10-minute heat index chart to kind of dial back the effort a little bit. Because what ends up happening if you don't do that is your heart rate just skyrockets straight out of the zone you're hoping to be working in and ends up much higher. You end up getting a much different workout, probably working in an entirely different energy zone than what you intended. So it is important to make those adjustments. And overall, I guess the rule of thumb here, which I can rant and never answer the question, is that it does depend upon the length of the interval. And so the longer the interval, especially 20 minutes or longer, you want to make that adjustment and dial it back down. I would use something one more time, like the 10-minute heat index chart as a gauge. For the shorter intervals, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes, I would kind of try as best as possible to maintain the paces that I was shooting for, and I would really make sure to take the recoveries nice and light, allow my heart rate to settle back. So hopefully that helps on that. So our next question here was, I'm trying to understand and gauge how I felt after the VO2 max efforts this week. So the longest was a minute long. I went at the right pace based on my 20-minute test, and I didn't feel winded. Is that normal for only a minute of effort? So I kind of referenced this a little bit earlier, but I wanted to talk about it in more detail. So there are a few things to break down here. And so I think this applies in this scenario, obviously, that this person is asking about, but it's going to apply in general over the first few weeks. The reason I say that is because, as I've kind of introed with this week's VO2 Max workout, next week's threshold workout, they're a little bit introductory in comparison to the zone. So if you're a very experienced runner, or you've done a lot of this in the past, it might be that the workout itself isn't hard enough. And that will quickly become apparent as we go into next week's workout and the following week's workout if it continues to be too easy. So there are really a couple things I would think about here to consider. Is one, how did the 20-minute distance test go? Was it a max effort? Do you feel like it gave you an accurate depiction of your zones? Because if you kind of the downfall of the performance test is that if you didn't really give it a full effort or didn't really go after it all the way, you're not going to have very accurate data to work with. If you did, and you're still feeling that the zones are a little bit easy in these intro workouts, maybe see how things advance here in week 2, when the workout becomes, instead of a 1 minute maximum, a 2 minute maximum. Does that change the dynamic for you? I mentioned on the threshold workout, you're going to be starting with 3 minute intervals, but we plan to go to 10-minute intervals. So does that change just your perception of it as you do 3 and say, that wasn't so bad. I'd probably go a little bit faster. Well, think about it. Is at that same pace, how would I feel about holding it for 10? And if you think that that's no problem, you could shoot right past it, run a little bit faster. Fine by me for the most part. I would start to advance at about 5 to 10 seconds per mile, a little bit less per kilograms or kilometer. Someone else will have to make that adjustment, but just a little bit faster. And if that feels appropriate, outstanding. Kind of go ahead and pin that as your new pace for the rest of this challenge. If that starts to feel like too much, just come right back to that pace based on your distance test. So it takes a little bit of experimentation. So I didn't have any note on this, but it's worth mentioning. There are some flaws in the 20-minute distance test. There's flaws in every test to try to determine pace. An actual threshold test is a 30-minute test. There's a reason we don't do a 30-minute test, and Matt says because nobody wanted to do a 30-minute test. So we could possibly get more accurate results if we did a 30-minute max effort as opposed to a 20-minute max effort, but try to make it a little bit more achievable and do that 20 minutes. Then there's the truest version of the test, 60-minute max effort to really determine threshold, but you have to take into account a lot of things. You have to have a very fit athlete, very trained athlete to do that test. And then the kind of part 3 that complicates the testing is that the difference between a 20-minute result and a marathon is a lot. So if you were trying to test really to get marathon paces, probably the best way to test for marathon pace is probably to run a really hard half marathon. So it makes it very hard to start a training block with a half marathon race. So we use this 20-minute test for a couple things. We use it as a metric, as a guideline, as a baseline, as a way to measure progress over the course of time, but really as a way to set a kind of a starting point or a guide point. And then it's going to take some experimentation. It's going to take some adjustment. It's going to take training and experience. And as you start to do that and you start to accumulate that, you can make some tweaks along the way. But so it's certainly not written in stone that those are the paces you have to use. They're just a certain guiding point and hopefully are helpful in getting the process started. Turns out that was all the questions I had today. Thought I had one more, but not at all. Thank you so much, as always, for being here. It's a pleasure to be with you on Friday nights. Have an amazing end of week 1 and week 2, and I will see you next week.